We've got some big news from some Flyers insiders regarding some potential trades for the Philadelphia Flyers involving Sam Ersson to potentially bolster the backup goalie position, as well as some other potential free agency signings or even some long shot targets for the Flyers to go after to overall improve the health of their backup goalie position and make a better tandem for this year. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about a couple of things. Number one, we're going to be talking about why it is that some people want Sam Ersson gone. We're going to talk about some of the reasons to keep him around. And then third, we're going to discuss a couple of trade targets and free agency targets for the Flyers to go after to help bolster this goaltender tandem that they're growing here in Philadelphia for the coming years. That being said, before we jump into everything, as always, if you've been enjoying this content so far, please make sure that you subscribe. It's 100% free. Most of the people that watch these videos aren't subscribed anyways, and it helps you stay up to date with me and the Flyers as a whole. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight on into it. And ladies and gentlemen, people have grown tired of Sam Ersson. All right, he started off last year incredibly bad. All right, there have been some people that have seriously been calling for Sam Ersson to be out the door as soon as possible. All right, some fairly notable people in the Flyers space talking about how they, generally speaking, don't want Sam Ersson back, as up until the Olympic break, Ersson was far and away one of the worst goaltenders in the NHL, if not the worst by quite a bit. Now, Ersson overall last season did improve towards the end of the year. That being said, there are some pretty good arguments as to why we shouldn't keep him around, and one of those is that improvement from Ersson is kind of a big part of why the Flyers were even in the hole that they were in come the Olympic break in the first place. The guys over at Broad Street Hockey made a big article talking about who they think the Flyers should go after in place of Sam Ersson, and they said something really good about how Ersson in his career so far has continue to just regress bit by bit. And he, while being a key player in that end of season turnaround, was also kind of the biggest reason that it existed in the first place. And by it existed, I mean kind of the biggest reason for the turnaround being necessary in the first place, as we saw that Vladar went down and the Flyers were dead in the water. And that's not really an exaggeration in the slightest. There was not much that the Flyers could do at all once Dan Vladar went down. All right, it was a truly miserable stretch of hockey to watch from the Flyers. Though this has led to some interesting discussions, because now people are pitching like, oh, well, if we don't bring Ersson back because he's a restricted free agent, so not exactly going to be the most people going after him, but if we do bring Ersson back, or if we don't bring Ersson back, I should say, who are we going after instead? Well, some insiders have pitched the idea that Joseph Woll and UPL are interesting names regarding the Flyers in a backup goalie position. Now, I think that saying that UPL is a potential backup candidate for the Flyers is a hilarious statement, and I think that that'll never happen in a million years. Especially with the state that Buffalo's in right now, I don't see UPL getting onto the Flyers anytime soon unless Buffalo decides to blow it up. That being said, Joseph Woll is an interesting person to talk about here, because we'll put it this way, Woll is also playing in the IIHF Men's World Championships. I talked about Porter Martone and Jack Berglund and one other Flyers player playing over at IIHF Worlds right now a couple days ago, which video did fairly well. I hope a lot of you saw that. That being said, Woll was not having the same storyline as those guys that I was talking about, where Berglund and Martone have been doing great and have been playing amazing over there for Canada and Sweden. Joseph Woll got pulled during a game where he let in 5 goals on the first 10 shots. So right now, there's some serious doubts regarding Joseph Woll's play. That being said, Joseph Woll is by no means a pushover. He's a guy that played fairly well during the year, and relatively good save percentage. Well, the goals against average you'd like to see more of, but given that the Toronto Maple Leafs weren't the greatest team this year, you can assume that if you put Woll on a team with a better defensive structure ahead of him, and I think that if you put him on a team that has a Flyer style of play in front of him, where they're a very defense-oriented team, where everyone just kind of tries to play to make life as easy as possible for the goalies behind them, I think Woll could do a lot better. Though this performance in Worlds does worry me, as while I'm not 100% against going after Woll, my worry comes from the fact that that we would end up trading for him, and I think that my worst nightmare is the Flyers overpaying for a goaltender in a trade while trying to push themselves further into the contenders club, and then accidentally kneecapping themselves because they gave up too much for a goalie that didn't live up to his price tag. So the other option is free agency. There are some interesting guys when it comes to free agency. The one that I want to point to the most is Connor Ingram. Now, Connor Ingram played for the Oilers this year, and he was fairly solid for the Oilers, all things considered. He was a player that, through the time that he spent with the Oilers, through somewhere in the realm of 40 games, had a fairly good goals against average. He had a 2.6 GAA and 8.99 save percentage. Played somewhat well in the playoffs, even though the Oilers didn't exactly have the greatest playoff run in the world. I know that they definitely wanted a lot more out of him. That being said, Ingram is going to be a goaltender that's going to have some more people going after him come free agency. I think that the Flyers are a team that, provided he doesn't want to stay in Edmonton, I think the Flyers are going to be a good look for him, because you give a guy that's getting a little bit older and he is already used to playing 30-ish games in a season. You tell him, hey, we want to bring you in. We want to bring you on to one of the youngest and hottest teams in the NHL, and we want to have you essentially play the same number of games, just with a team that's going to be a little bit more competent defensively. And I don't think that's an offer that you can necessarily turn down if you're a guy in Ingram's position. Right? I think that if a team obviously pitches you more money, I'm not telling the Flyers to come out here and give him $20 million to make sure he comes over. I think that's, there's a ceiling to how high you should go contract-wise with a guy like him if you're going to try and get him in free agency. That being said, the Flyers need to understand where that line is and not go over it, because we don't want to end up overpaying for a guy that could not live up to the price tag. And with goalies, it's incredibly, incredibly risky to pay guys an absolute ton, because if you give someone $11 million, $12 million a year, and it doesn't turn into Sergei Bobrovsky with the Panthers where you win 2 Stanley Cups, I'm inclined to tell you that you overpaid and that you lost out on that deal. So the Flyers, if they're going to go after a guy in free agency, whether it be Ingram, whether it be anybody else, they need to pay attention to what it is that they're paying him, and they need to understand what is too much for someone that's going to play less than half the season, and when to stop if a bidding war starts to happen. There's one other player I want to bring up very briefly, though, that is a trade target for the Flyers here. And while I'm against trading for Woll out of fear of overpaying for him, given the way that he performed in Worlds recently, there's a certain goaltender on the Buffalo Sabres that I think could work pretty well in the Flyers. No, it's not UPL. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I don't think that the Flyers should be going after UPL. I have seen some people, including the tweet that I showed earlier, mentioning about how they think that UPL is an interesting name when it comes to looking for a backup for the Flyers. I think that going after UPL is crazy. There's a different goaltender in Buffalo, though, that I think could work really well, and that's Devon Levi. Now, forgive me if I pronounced his last name wrong, but he is so obviously with the way that Alex Lyon and the way that UPL have been playing in Buffalo right now, he's not getting a lot of playtime. All right, he's been down in the AHL basically the last 3 years as a whole. I think he's played a total of 30 games across the 3 years he's been in Buffalo. Not exactly what you want to see from a guy that's 24 and starting to get into what people are going to think to be his prime as a goalie. That being said, there have been rumors around Buffalo of the Sabres potentially being ready to part ways with him. And He's 24 years old, so he's on the younger side, and he has the potential to be. It's a situation that's very low risk because if you trade maybe a couple like mid-round pick, like maybe a mid-round pick or two, maybe a mid and a late round pick for a guy that's not really been playing in the NHL a ton, and you bring him over and it's like, well, we got a guy that very clearly, or that we got a guy that you can tell why he was in the AHL so long, and he's like, oh, he's got like a 3.8, he's got like a 3.8 goals against, and he's got like an 8.7 save percentage. Well, congratulations, we have Sam Ersson in a different font now. All right, that's the situation we're in here. The difference between trading for him and trading for Woll is that Woll, because the Maple Leafs now have the first overall pick and are going to be trying to transition into win now mode as quickly as possible, going after Woll, the Leafs are going to want more, and they're going to try to get more out of Philadelphia. So there's a much higher chance of us getting fleeced or giving up too much for Justin Woll. Devin Levi, I don't think has the same issue, and even then, I think that his floor is at the same spot that Sam Ersson's is at, while he has a much higher ceiling that Ersson has, especially considering that Ersson has shown nothing but regression so far. Ladies and gentlemen, if you agreed with what I had said at all today, if you disagreed with me, if you thought that I was an idiot, please make sure that you let me know. I would love to stick around and look through the comments to see what people are saying about this. If you agree with me, if there's anyone else in free agency or that's a potential trade target that you'd like me to look at. I know some people were talking about David Rittich, though I didn't really agree with that too much, so I didn't bring it up right now. But if there's anything else, trade-wise, free agency-wise, that you'd like to let me know about that you think I should have mentioned, please make sure that you let me know down below. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Flyers.